can we put it on YouTube, on LinkedIn as well?
Yeah, that's fine, no problem.
Amazing. So we have an incredible speaker here. I'm not going to introduce him because, I mean, he's going to introduce himself to each and every one of you. So basically, in the chat box, you can just use it to let us know where you're connecting from, which country, and if you're excited for this, please, you can always drop that in the comment section while Tapi is doing his presentation. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat box. Post his presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session where we can go through the questions and we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to at least ask a question. At the same time, if you're in a noisy environment, we kindly plead with you to actually just mute yourself. And when it's time for you to speak up, he will definitely give you the opportunity to speak up. I'll be there monitoring the chats and while Tapi does his thing. On the other hand, I'm here, Frank, and I officially want to welcome each and everyone to this presentation. Over to you, Mr. Tapi.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Thank you for the warm welcome. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. It seems as if a lot of the people are on GMT, so our time, so it seems as if we're all kind of similar times. So yes, as Frank's mentioned, my name is Tapi. As you can see on the screen there, my full name is Tapiwanashe Kanengoni. I'm a Zimbabwean-born health and safety practitioner, as you all know, who also resides in the UAE, living in Abu Dhabi. So just a kind of brief check on me. I'm a health and safety manager for Miral Experiences, supporting the Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi. I have just over 6 years worth of experience in various industries supporting health, safety, and environment management, spanning across engineering, logistics, and also now attractions. In terms of kind of continued professional development, I'm a cert IOSH, in process of completing my chartership as well with IOSH, and I also hold a Bachelor of Laws. So before I start and go into a little bit of the session today, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Frank for giving me the opportunity, really, to give you all a deep dive into my career on Talk Safety with Frank. Throughout this session, kind of the main areas that I'll be delivering are on kind of giving you insights into my career journey so far. You know, talking about some of the experiences that I've picked up along the way, and hopefully sharing some valuable experiences as well that you all will be able to apply across your career and safety, which will hopefully give you the best chance to be able to succeed. So I'll introduce myself. As you can see with my LLB law, I'm a law graduate who has now since evolved into being a safety practitioner. In the world of law, what I learned was there are so many transferable elements to various parts of business and just general working world, and in particular health and safety. You know, even to this day, I still rely on all of the academic theoretical concepts that I learned early in my academic career. So that's my academic background, but it never started like that. I actually started in health and safety as an undergraduate or an apprentice, you may know as you can see in the photograph there. I was just a small teenager with all the kind of best intentions and visions in the world to change the world, as I'm sure some of you do as well. But all I was just a curious kid, really, who had a lot of determination and intent on wanting to make a difference. What that looked like, I don't know. I didn't really have a clear roadmap. So if you're sitting here today and you don't have a real kind of roadmap on where you want to go, just know that even for some of us who've kind of trailblazed in a short period, we never had a roadmap to begin with too. So what I did have was a hell of a lot of determination and passion. Passion for something that I discovered, which is health and safety. And from the moment in which I really learned about kind of this line of work, it was really a no-brainer that I wanted to be in this profession, but not only to be in this profession, but I wanted to make it a profession where I represented it the way in which it should do. And with safety, it should be it should be a profession that is respected, and is seen as a profession that keeps people safe and saves lives. So to me, you know, when I had that kind of curiosity early in my career, it was all about kind of harnessing that kind of curiosity, using the passion that I had, and trying to just do the best job that I can. And that's all you can hope for, guys. Fundamentally, it's doing the best that you can to keep people safe. And that's what we do. Aside from, you know, my academic and professional career, you know, I think it's really important that you and we all have hobbies outside of work. I think it's massively important for us, particularly if you already are working in health and safety, to have different hobbies, different interests that take your mind away from the day to day. I mean, just today alone, I've done a full day's worth of work, and obviously now we're doing something slightly separate to work, but it's been a really intense and busy day, making a lot of decisions in a really fast-paced environment. So having the opportunity or having a hobby that can take my mind away from that gives me the opportunity to kind of reset, recharge my batteries, and be able to go back again, because tomorrow there'll be a whole set of new challenges that will present themselves and a whole load of decisions that need to be made. But I need to be ready for that. So being kind of fit outside of work and having other hobbies and interests is something that I really advocate for you all to have, aside from obviously wanting to just progress within your professional career. So before I go into kind of the details of the principles that I've learned and giving you all short kind of tips and hints on how you can maybe get some marginal gains and 5%, 2%, 1% to increase your capability to achieve what you want to achieve in safety, I think it's really important for me to give you context of my academic cross health and safety professional journey first. So as I mentioned, I'm a law graduate. I attended Nottingham Law School, where I completed 4 years of my bachelor's degree in law. And within this, I also completed a diploma within a pathway to professional practice, which gave me an initial insight into working in a professional setting, basically. And in this kind of period, I was able to develop my commercial acumen and really start to understand and see operational projects at a really large scale. Bearing in mind at this stage, I was a 18-year-old kid. But the degree itself, you know, from a legal side, gave me an opportunity to start thinking analytically, and gave me the opportunity to start thinking about concepts such as risk, compliance, governance. And I started to really understand the basics. For example, the relationship between an employer and an employee. Looking at kind of different legal instruments such as duty of care elements. And we know, I'm sure we all know, as we work in safety, how important it is to understand the relationship that the employee has with the employer and maybe its contractors as well. So that early legal academic background gave me the foundational knowledge to start understanding the key relationships that you need to know within a working context. Also, how to protect a business's brand and reputation as well from damage. As we all know, potentially incidents, accidents can happen, and there can be potential repercussions of that elements too. So that real foundational grounding was critical to giving me the platform to then go and take safety on as a profession. So as I mentioned, with my degree, I completed 4 years, as you can see there, 2018 to 2022. But within those 4 years, I had 1 year, which was what they call in the UK an integrated placement year. Now, this integrated placement year basically means that for 1 year, I go into the world of work and I pause my studies and I gain work experience. And I did this in line with my degree or my professional practice. And actually at this time, I was successful in applying for 2 different roles. One was a graduate role as a technical safety undergraduate for a company called E.ON UK. And the other was a law firm, commercial law firm, where I was offered the opportunity to go in and do a year in various kind of seatings, as they call it, in the legal firm. I actually decided to take the unconventional route. So the easiest thing for me to do, as you think logically, I was doing a law degree, was to go work for the law firm, right? But I actually decided to go and work for this company called E.ON UK, who, if you don't know, are one of the largest providers of renewable energy, gas and infrastructure developments across Europe. And, you know, you're probably thinking, well, that's a bit of a strange decision because you're studying law. So surely you would have gone and worked for a law firm. But as you'll start to see, I never kind of pick the easy option. I always try and challenge myself and do something slightly different. So that was it. I decided to go for the role at E.ON UK. And this is when I started to really apply the legal, but also health and safety concepts within a working context. Now imagine I'm an 18, 19-year-old kid. Yeah, 19-year-old kid turning 20, I think. And I've been pushed into this large-scale corporate law firm, and I know nothing. I know basic concepts of law and principles of law, but I know nothing about HSSE, which was health, safety, security, and environment. And also there was an additional caveat, which was engineering governance. So I was courageous, but really, you know, there was no real conceptual HSE knowledge at all. And I wanted a challenge, and boy, I got a challenge. I've since described that experience as a baptism of fire, really. I was just thrown into the deep end. And one thing I'll say to you is, whatever role it is that you're doing, if you have been thrown into the deep end, is to always find ways to survive and swim. You know, you hear about sinking or swimming, always be a swimmer. You hear about concepts of fight or flight, always be someone that's willing to fight, because on the other side of that fight is success. So, yeah, you know, it was a first real exposure to kind of understanding operational risk, understanding how to manage large-scale projects on in an engineering context. And I'm placed on big projects at 19. And for me, it was all about learning on the job. Learning on the job knowledge is kind of the way that I've always done things. You know, throughout the kind of 9 to 5 that I was doing, or 8 to 4 that I was doing as a graduate at the time, I was obviously doing my work, and then after work, the only other way to kind of gain the knowledge in HSE was to do more work. As Frank was mentioning earlier, now having no time, it's normal, because he's determined to be successful. He's determined to be influential. And even at the age of 18, 19, I was doing my full day's worth of work. But I knew in order for me to capture the knowledge that I needed to then add value as a graduate at that time, I knew it was important to research on case law. I knew it was important to read articles. I knew it was important to read on health and safety guidance documents, because at that time I had no knowledge. It was just foundational. So at that point, I was learning about what a hazard was, what a risk is, you know, the health and safety risk matrix, what that looks like. All of the concepts that we now kind of probably take for granted, depending on how long you've been in safety, I was learning. And one advice and kind of key thing that I would take from that is those foundational elements really allowed me to be really assured and sure of who I am now. So those concepts that I now don't even think about, I take for granted. In that early phase, I made sure I gave myself the time to master the understanding of those concepts, so that now I'm in more of a senior managerial position. It's not even something I think about. So one piece of advice to you all is make sure that the basics you've mastered before thinking about moving up or moving to a different. Make sure you just understand the basics really well. And that experience with E.ON just taught me one thing, was no one's going to do it for you. You know, these experienced guys that were delivering projects with me at the time expected me to deliver every day. And how I got that knowledge, well, that was on me. So every night after work, I'd open the HSE website, I would find an industry guidance document, I would go on articles and LinkedIn, and I would speak to people and ask questions. So that would be a key piece of advice that I learned in that period, which was just, you know, really utilize the resources that you have available to you. So after 1 year of working for E.ON, I returned back to university, completed my final 2 years of studies within law, and graduated by 2020. As we all know, that was the COVID year. So by 2021, I was searching for my first job in HSE, and a transport company called Wincanton gave me my initial opportunity in HSE to my first real HSE gig, really. And you know, I came in at quite a junior level, but you know, I had the presence of mind to understand that it was part of the process. And that allowed me really to build on the core HSE skills that I now have now. So as I mentioned with E.ON, it was all about kind of piecing everything together, understanding what this all was. Wincanton was the opportunity to start to exercise those core skills that I had learned. So understanding, you know, how do you audit? How do you inspect? How do you influence operational teams? How do you deliver audits? You know, and it was really challenging, actually. Challenging more so not because I didn't understand the concepts. The concepts were easy. Concepts are easy because all it takes is for you to understand what they mean. Applying them in the real world context now is difficult. And the challenge I found was I was working with really senior management teams that had been in their roles for a substantial period of time. And the last thing that they want is a fresh-faced kid coming in and telling them that they have challenges, issues with their culture that they need to fix. And, you know, for me, it was all about, again, fighting or flighting, sinking or swimming. And I did what I knew best, which was to fight. And what I mean by that is I honed in on the skills that I knew I was really good at. So I knew my communication was strong. I knew that I had the ability to influence and engage. So what I did was I brought along all of these really challenging senior people to support me with my initiatives, with my campaigns, almost to make them feel like they were the ones that were rolling out these campaigns. And all of a sudden, they became more involved. All of a sudden, they were far more engaged with all of these initiatives because I made it feel like they were the ones that were doing it. And one thing I've known is that people will protect what they've helped to build. So if you've made them feel like they've been a part of it, they will certainly help you. So yeah, you know, that was my kind of 2-year period. And I knew, again, although I wasn't fully finished with the project, I knew I had got it to a position where the next person coming in would be able to take it away and develop on that culture. I then transitioned to from transport and logistics to the world of automation. And for those of you that don't know, that's more working with technological solutions such as intralogistics equipment. So basically robotics that move stock items from one place to another through kind of technology, software technology. So I was mainly working with engineers in this world, and engineers are all interesting people. Shout out to all my engineers in the chat today, because they have a very specific way of thinking. But it was the same, you know, I was managing contractors, maintenance activities, and kind of technical safety. But again, it was showing courage to go into a different industry that I hadn't been in before. And being able to survive, walking into the unknown and being able to survive. And, you know, it's the same for you all. My urge to you from what you can take from this kind of timeline and journey is don't limit yourself, and deeply trust your capabilities, but you can only do that when you've done the work. So again, I was going into a different industry, but again, it took a hell of a lot of time outside of my working hours to research, to understand, to ask questions, and to really kick on. And again, really good experience, 2 years there. And I would say that was a really strong 2 years, really, because that is what spearheaded, I suppose, me to be where I'm at now, which is with Miral Experiences. So I felt really adventurous with this opportunity, really, because not only was I changing industry, it was a time where I decided to actually change region. And that brings its whole kind of different challenges too. As I'm sure some of you know, as I'm sure you've all relocated from various parts of the world over to the UAE, which finds me where I'm at now, which is the Health and Safety Manager at Ferrari World, managing really complex operational environments, of which you can ask me questions about later. I can give you some information I can't. But yeah, it's a weird and wonderful place. It certainly is a roller coaster, pardon the pun, even though we manage, you know, theme parks and attractions. It's a roller coaster every day, and no 2 days are certainly the same. So that's my kind of journey. I think it's important for you guys to understand that before I go into a little bit more about these principles I was talking about. So when it comes to experience, guys, I'm much like a lot of you. I can imagine a lot of you are safety people already in some vicinity, either managers or administrative staff or inspectors, however it looks. I've seen a lot. You know, I've worked in different environments in various industries, and you know, look, I've delivered and supported across infrastructure, logistics, and operational environments. And one of the biggest advantages you can take as a health and safety professional is exposure, because no two industries will manage risk the same way. Infrastructure, for example, with E.ON, teaches you about kind of long-term planning, whereas logistics, for example, is a lot more fast-paced, and that's more testing you on your kind of operational control. Whereas when you're here in a theme park and it's more operational and guest-facing, you're really testing your consistency within your discipline. And it's really important to understand kind of the different areas that it tests you to be really good at what you do. I've also led inspections, as I mentioned, and audits and behavioral safety interventions, as you probably all do now on a daily basis. And one thing that I learned, hopefully you can take away, is inspections and audits, that they're not actually about finding faults. They're about finding the truth. And that's something that we need to distinguish as safety practitioners. The most valuable lesson that I've learned is not actually about, it's not about how you conduct the inspection or the audit. It's what matters is the check. What matters more than the checklist actually itself is actually making people feel that you're there to help and support them and educate them. Because actually, if you just have an audit checklist, it can actually come across intimidating to a lot of people on the ground. So, you know, our goal isn't to find 0 non-conformances. Our goal is just to make sure that we don't have any surprises when we complete our audits and inspections. We should already have an indication of where our sites, our operations are currently operating at. And the job is to educate. You know, I've also supported high-risk activities, working at height, lifting operations, electrical works. And one thing I found is with high-risk work anywhere, it doesn't fail because of the paperwork, for example, with permit to works or risk assessments per se. It usually fails because of some sort of underlying human factual element, whether that's, you know, pressure, complacency, people being distracted, rushing, people making assumptions. As we all know, you know, our job as safety practitioners is to make sure that we slow things down and we fully assess everything that's happening within the activity, because everyone else is trying to speed things up to make sure things happen, right? So, you know, it's really important that we understand these human factual elements so that we can control them to prevent major accidents happening. Most major accidents that I've dealt with is usually due to complacency, because a lot of the time people are overconfident. Because you'll hear terms such as, I've done this job 100 times, you know, so people often feel overconfident with their abilities and capabilities, which can lead to complacency, and they can take that eye off the ball and it can lead to real serious incidents. I've also worked with contractors and various operational teams as well to improve, you know, standards and compliance. And again, the thing with contractors that I need to kind of clear up there is contractors tend not to fail because they don't know the rules. It's not really about that. They tend to fail because the expectations from the beginning are not aligned with their client. And I think the key thing there is it's on the client or the person managing the work to make sure that people fully understand why they're being asked to do something, not just being told what to do. So you need to explain to people why. And that's something that I picked up along the way and I found is a really useful technique to improve client-contractor relations. You know, the best safety practitioners and professionals that I've ever worked with do not police the operations. They work with them, they collaborate with them. And that's when you'll get operations start coming to HSE saying, we'll get HSE involved early, so, you know, we can plan and prepare better to prevent things going wrong in the long term. I've also focused a lot more as I've developed a bit more seniority in my role, a focus on risk reduction and kind of showing active demonstrations of visible safety leadership across any site that I work in. You know, at some point within your HSE career, the focus shifts from just identifying risks to actually preventing incidents and reducing risk from our operation. And risk reduction isn't something that happens, you know, it's not something that's written just on paper. It's actually about influencing change, changing decisions and behaviors. And I find something that I'm learning now at more kind of strategic senior level is changing the priorities of senior leadership as well, which can be a lot more challenging. But being present, being visible is something certainly that is important to influencing that culture and influencing change across any operations. So nowadays, I spend a lot more times in this office thinking, why does that risk, why does that hazard keep occurring? Why does this issue keep happening? Because the important thing is, you know, if we continue to control risks in the same way, we're not going to be surprised when the same outcomes occur, you know? And, you know, I've really kind of shifted my thinking within this role, even though I've only been in the post for 7 to 8 months, but it changes the way that you kind of start to see things. And it's led me to develop a set of principles that I work with. And these principles, these behaviors really, these are what really turn risk reduction into kind of real life. And I'm going to talk you through them now. So these key principles all have a rule with them, and I'll try and explain them the best way that I can. So the first principle that I speak about is engagement. The rule of engagement is safety only works when people are involved and they're not instructed. So one thing that I'll say there is safety won't improve just because you told people what to do, as I mentioned before. It improves when people are engaged and they are involved within the solution. Like I did all those years back at Wincanton, where I brought them into my initiatives. I knew that the only way to get them involved was to engage them. And actually, this photograph was taken at that time with one of the senior people that I mentioned, just as a testimony of that. And when teams are involved within the risk assessment procedure, the method statement creation, initiatives, and engagement activities, you know, it increases ownership of them. And like I said, remember what I said, people will protect what they've helped to build. If you, as a safety practitioner, has built this safety management system and said, okay, I'm going to apply it in my business, if you've not brought people along the way, they have no kind of feeling or relatability to it. But if you've brought them in from the beginning and shown them the journey, they feel more inclined to want to protect it. So that's something that I would say certainly engagement is key. The next principle is around presence. And the rule there is, if you're not visible, you're not influencing. So, you know, as a leader, and when I say leader, by the way, I don't mean leader as per your title, health and safety vice president or director or whatever. You don't even have to be chartered. I look at some of the best leaders I see in safety are my operational team managers who don't even have a NEBOSH, who don't even have safety within their title, because safety is kind of what you do, right? Rather than your role and your title. So if you're a health and safety admin, if you're not even within safety, but are just interested in safety, you can be a leader. When we talk about leadership influence, so anyone who can influence, that doesn't happen with me sat in here in my office. It happens when I go out on the shop floor and I speak to people and I am present every day, and that will change behavior and that will influence culture. And that kind of visibility that I have, as you can see in the image there, you know, delivering to a large group of people, it builds trust. It builds trust for people to want to speak up. Because fundamentally, if people don't see you, they won't feel supported, and there's less opportunity for them to raise critical issues that are happening out in your areas, you know? The next principle is around passion. I find it really difficult to deliver these things over Teams because I don't know if that kind of real passion that I have for this role comes across. I hope it does, because, you know, that energy that I have for safety is something that's taken me to where I'm at now. And the rule with passion is that energy is what drives the culture. You know, people feel the energy that you bring them. I can see the organizational policy there for right in front of me. That doesn't create culture. I mean, it's a great, you know, it's a great satisfaction for ISO 45001 criteria and various other parts, and also is, you know, is needed as a legal doctrine in various parts of the world too. But that's not what creates culture. You know, culture is something that you feel. There's a famous quote some of you may know by a lady called Maya Angelou, where she says that people will not remember the way that you made them, what you did for them or what you said to them, but people will remember the way you made them feel. And I've loved that quote, even though I just really struggled to remember it. I love that quote because, you know, it's so true to cultural change. It's so true to influencing people. And our job as safety practitioners is to influence people to make the right decisions that make them do the right thing to keep them safe. So if you can make people feel engaged and involved, that will make the greatest difference. And your passion is a key component within that. Dovetailing that, so on top of that, it's also recognition. Because what gets recognized gets repeated. We know that. In safety, we often focus on correcting what people do wrong. You know, we forget to reinforce what's right. When people do the right thing, it's also good to give them a pat on the back and say, well done. You know, when we recognize that people have made a safe decision or they've made a really good safety intervention, we need to reinforce those standards. You need to reinforce those standards, because if we're only talking about safety when there's a problem, I think we're sending the wrong message to the business and to everyone else that works with us. Which kind of leads me on to the final bit, which is standards. And the rule with standards that I have is, you know, with safety, good enough is never good enough. Someone told me that very early in my career within safety, and I've kind of kept that all the way throughout as a way to keep pushing me. Because risk reduction, when we talk about, you know, reducing risk and protecting people, depends on us having consistent standards that we apply, especially and most critically under pressure. Strong safety leaders, again, I mentioned safety leaders being anyone within the role of safety, are those that will challenge poor behaviors when it's really difficult, when it's uncomfortable. Because the standard that you decide to walk past is the standard that you're accepting. So it's important for you to ensure that if you see something that is unsafe, you report it immediately and you make sure that those elements are dealt with. And those are the key principles, guys. It's not rocket science. They're really simple. They're quite easy, actually. They're really simple, but I don't think people always find them easy to apply, because sometimes it's challenging in the world of work when you're working with really senior people and making really challenging decisions in whatever environment that is. You know, it can be really difficult. So I think, although these principles that are spoken about may be really simple, I think sometimes people find them difficult to actually apply. So just to move on, before I talk to you a little bit more and give you a bit more valuable tips about kind of working in this environment and what I've taken away and everything else, I just wanted to give you some short tips. So, you know, everything that I've spoken about is kind of all theoretical, it's all principles. But when I really reflect on my journey so far within health and safety, there are very few kind of practical things that I wish I would have known earlier. And it would have maybe sped up the journey and the development, maybe would have saved me for some really difficult conversations that have happened, or some really difficult learnings that I've had. And these habits, for me, have made the biggest difference. So I've called them Tappy's top tips. So, you know, talk safety with Frank is not only the kind of good play on words that we have going on here, Tappy's top tips, but I've got that copyrighted as well, just in case anyone wants to use that. So the first principle or tip that I have is for you all to be curious. I think you need to invest time in understanding whatever operation and process that you work in, both ends, from the start to the end, not just understanding your role as a safety practitioner. Very early in my career, I focused on my health and safety responsibilities because I needed to master my craft. But over time, I learned that the biggest kind of risk sat with, you know, the conversations that are happening, for example, in handovers between operational teams, because sometimes the responsibilities may have overlaps and sometimes the roles are not clearly defined. But you only know that when you're on the ground and you fully understand the process, even though it's technically not within safety's roles and responsibilities. So it's really important for you to understand the kind of the full end-to-end process. Because if you don't really understand how the job works, my question to you is, how are you going to be able to influence it effectively? I think the other tip is to be clever with data. As I've moved kind of more into a senior role and trying to be a little bit more strategic with how the park operates and how the business then looks at kind of health and safety, you know, I've looked at data a lot, and data is your friend. You know, I would say data is something that you need to leverage. It's something that you need to use, no matter how big or small, in order to influence and make change. It doesn't actually need to be complex, or it doesn't have to be substantial, big numbers. You know, near miss trends, repeat observations, you know, all of these elements, they tell a story about something that's happening. And you don't always need like a big incident, for example, to make a change. Sometimes it's those small but consistent patterns that are enough for you to make change. So good data will take your conversation that you're having with someone and make it something that is powerful and factual, and give you the kind of it gives you the power to be able to drive improvement, and that's when usually the big boys really put their hands into the pockets. So the next thing tip that I have is around consistency. To be honest, being consistent at anything will be what leads you to really get to the top level when it comes to safety. So for me, you need to focus on the small wins and track them. You know, some of the photographs that you've seen in my presentation today are things that I've tracked from the start of my career all the way to today, and I will continue to do that all the way throughout, even if it's small, because those repeated improvements are the ones that stick. You know, if you're able to track your wins, you can show people that your effort has led to progress, even if at times it feels a bit slow and, you know, it doesn't always feel like it's going in the right direction. Photos of, you know, correcting hazards or closing out actions is enough, to be honest, because that consistency will build your credibility in many conversations, like interviews, which I'll talk about in a minute. And above all, the most important thing, as you've seen in my career, where I've jumped industry to industry, moving country, as all of you probably have as well, or have the ambition to want to do, you need to have courage. You need to have that ability to back yourself because you know you're going to put in the work, but you need to have courage to be able to also not be afraid to ask questions, to challenge something that you see that you may think is wrong, because often with safety, our instinct is our biggest kind of indicator. If something feels unsafe, often it is. And some of the hardest moments that I've had in health and safety, honestly, are the ones where I've had to speak up when I've felt really uncomfortable. Because if it doesn't feel safe, that feeling generally deserves some major attention. And those are the top tips really that I have for you guys. I don't want to kind of bombard you with a lot of information. I hope this has been helpful in some capacity for you. And look, none of these tips again are about being perfect, because I'm certainly not. They're just focused around you being curious, thoughtful, you know, thinking about what you're doing, consistent, and brave within your approach. And I think, you know, they're not exhaustive, but these things are things that will certainly help you to be able to elevate your career to the next level. So I've kind of given you a bit of a background of everything that I've acquired, my knowledge, my experience, you know, my key hints and tips. Now let's move on to something a bit more kind of targeted for you guys, you know. So everything that we've spoken about so far is, again, around work and how I've engaged and led and challenged and all of these kind of things. But I think the bit that often, I would say, the audience that I've got today get or overlook is around personal branding. Because you need to be able to shape your story, you know, because if you don't shape your story the way in which you want to, someone else will. If you're looking for jobs and your personal brand doesn't represent you in the right light, then the recruiter, the person on the other end of your CV, is going to shape who you are through their own assumptions based off your job title. So it's really important for you to take away what we talk about when we talk about personal branding. So, for example, with your CV, you can see my CV there. CV is an important document and tool because it gives you the ability to communicate and convey who you are. It gives you the ability to speak before you've actually even spoken. So before anyone meets you, they've read your CV. And this document is what shapes people's expectations of you. You know, what's your value? What's your credibility? You know, what are you capable of? And if your CV just lists your job role, people will assume that's all you did because that's all you're telling them. You know, so your CV should reflect the impact that you've had, not just the role that you've had and what you did. You know, instead of saying on your CV, I conducted inspections, talk about how you improved the results within those inspections. You know, instead of, for example, saying I supported contractors, you need to show how you improved compliance or how you integrated a new initiative and engagement changed. Because if your CV if I get a CV and it reads to me just as a job description, I think it's really kind of underselling. It doesn't really sell that person. And one thing that I then decided to do, and a short story. So when I was a graduate back at E.ON UK, as I mentioned, right early on in my career, they gave us the opportunity, because they were shaping us to be leaders, right? They gave us an opportunity to conduct interviews. So we would have incoming graduates come in to interview for the next year. And we would have really, impressive young professionals coming in from all over the world, China, Japan, the UK, Africa, various parts in Nigeria, etc., etc. And they would come really ready to go. And they were all of a really high standard. And one thing that I remember, one thing that I take away is that there was a kid that walked in. If I remember correctly, he was from Japan. And he was a really impressive young man who had a lot to show for himself. And the thing that I recognized from him and I've taken away was he walked in with a briefcase. Now, everyone would usually come to an interview with a CV, but he walked in with a briefcase. And in the briefcase, he had, a whole load of documentations. And I asked him what it was. And he said, I've got a professional portfolio. And the kid must have been 18 at the time. And I said, oh, what's this? And he said, it's a professional portfolio of the work that I've done. You got to remember, he was 18. So he wouldn't have had a lot of opportunity to have gained a lot of experience at that time. But still at that age, he'd had his own personal branding. So I decided from that moment, I'd create my own professional portfolio, which then takes your CV one step further. And every interview that I've gone to since, I've given them my professional portfolio. Don't show me, tell me. Don't show me what, don't tell me, got that wrong. Don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me what you've done. Show me what you've done. Show me with evidence, not just open claims, And developing a professional portfolio is something that sets you apart as well, because I can look at your CV and look at your portfolio and put the two together and see whether this person is really credible. And it's not about exaggerating on there and pretending to be someone you're not. It's just about making sure that, the work that you've done is accurately represented. And this is the last slide, guys. I know I've spoken for quite some time, but I do apologize. I hope you've taken away a lot from what I've spoken about, if not even just a couple of hints or tips. I just wanted to speak about a few frequently asked questions that I get from a lot of safety practitioners trying to find their way or trying to, improve their current positioning within HSE. So the first question that I've got is, how do I boost my chances of successfully landing a job in safety within the UAE? And one of the things that I'll say with this from the time that I've been here so far is one of the biggest kind of mistakes that people make is sending the same CV, just pinging out the same CV that they've used for one job somewhere else. If you're sending out a CV for a theme park and attractions firm, the CV and portfolio that you've got for a construction role should be completely different to one that you've got for a maritime role. But if you're just sending out the same CV and it's not tailored fit, I think you're struggling, because you need to make it adaptable. You need to make it adaptable to the role that you're trying to go for, because employers want to see that you've really thought about this role and you're not just kind of firing on all cylinders at any roles that are available. So that's one kind of key piece of advice that I've seen as well. Again, it's about talking about your operational impact, as I mentioned, and not just qualifications, because guys, nowadays, the NEBOSH, everyone's got this certificate, everyone's got the diploma. So it's about a little bit more than that, Show that you understand the UAE context. Show that you understand the Dubai municipality and how it works. Show that you understand the labour laws, show that you understand the Abu Dhabi Public Health Centre and the various kind of standards and technical safety guidelines that they have in there. These are the things that I was demonstrating in order to land my role in the UAE whilst I was in the UK. I showed them that whilst I wasn't, or I didn't have UAE experience, I was able to go one step further and demonstrate an appreciation to want to understand the context of the area where I was going. The next one is, how long does it take, you know, or how long should I expect my job hunting process to take? The honest answer is it varies depending on the organization. It varies depending on the role. You know, the more senior you are in the role, it probably takes a little bit longer. There are more kind of hurdles to jump. And recruitment processes here can take a lot longer than people expect. But I think kind of that patience and consistency that you show and remaining committed and resilient is to the rejection, because, you know, we're all human. We are all susceptible to rejection. How you bounce back from that and remaining strong-willed and remaining on the boat and remaining committed is what will define you in the end, for sure. So follow up. If you sent an email, if you've sent a message on LinkedIn, if you've applied for a role, try and see if there's an email you can find and follow up with these people, because that shows a commitment. Fine line between following up and annoying people, so be careful of that too, but just try and get that balance right. The other question is kind of what are the main differences between working in the UAE and the UK? People ask me that because of the cultural differences. One thing I'll say there is that the workforce here is far more diverse, for sure, which means that communication is something that you need to be strong at. It's critical, really, because you might have non-English speakers, you might have Arabic speakers, you might have people that speak Malayalam, which is there's a huge subcontinent of people from South India here in Kerala. So you need to understand how they communicate effectively. Things also move faster here. You know, you've got to make decisions quickly. I mean, in the first four months, I was going home with a headache. Oh, decisions, and the volume was high. But only over time, as you become a lot more kind of long in the tooth, which is an English saying around kind of a bit more experienced, those kind of repetitive decisions, you understand the framework to use to make the right decisions quicker. And you know, the regulatory framework here is fundamentally different. You know, and the consequences to non-compliance are far more severe. You know, we talk about vicarious liability, which is basically where the organizational entity is what kind of takes the brunt responsibility of an employee's actions. They don't have that here. So it's a lot more strict liability in the UAE. So, you know, understanding all of that is something that takes not just understanding to get your head around, but actually something, you know, that brings a lot of pressure in some working context too, because there's a lot more personal responsibility on decision makers. So you need to understand that. The other question that I get a lot is kind of around qualifications and certifications. Which ones are more valued within the UAE? NEBOSH is something that's valued internationally, so it's something that's recognized and respected. So having that is excellent. That will get you through the door. The qualifications will always open the doors for you, but your experience, your portfolio, your CV, demonstrating your value is what counts. You know, God knows the amount of people that have told me that they are competent at ISO 45001 auditing, for example. But then when we start to have a conversation about how it applies in real life, you know, it's a different game. You know, you can cite to me all the clauses, but tell me how we actually keep people safe. Tell me how it's integrated into our safety management system. And the final element is, or question is, what are the key challenges that are faced when relocating and settling in the UAE? So professionally, I think that the biggest challenge is building my credibility. You know, you're coming to a new environment. Physically, I look really young. So coming into a senior role as well, sometimes it can be, or a managerial role, it can be a little bit different. people treat you differently just by how they see you. So you need to win people over, and not by compromising safety, but win people over by showing that you will not compromise safety for anything. So building credibility in a new environment is something that you all will have to experience in some capacity. But culturally, you're learning everything again from the start. I lived in the UK for 20 odd years after I was born in Zimbabwe. So I was so, as you can tell by the way that I talk, so ingrained within English culture that you come to this country, this state, and this region, and you have to start listening first before trying to change things, because everything is different here. So I had to kind of learn and adapt to that also. And from a personal element, relocation brings its own kind of practical challenges, housing, financial, visas, all of those kind of issues. But honestly, I'm so humbled by Minal experiences, because they've been amazing. Their onboarding process is seamless and so supportive. So, everything is around adapting as quickly as you can. So, yeah, look, all of our journeys are different. But the key thing here, guys, is making sure that you're prepared, making sure that you go to work and you put in the work and you adapt and present yourself in the best way that you can, day by day, step by step. Show that courage, and certainly you'll be successful. And that's the end of the presentation, guys. So I'll open the floor up for kind of any comments. I'm sure you guys were probably speaking a lot throughout, so I need to answer a lot of questions. Here we go.
Yeah, Tapi, if you don't mind, before they start pumping in with all the questions, guys, I want you all to give a thumbs up, give all the emojis you've ever had in your career to Tapi, because he has been amazing.